Hey everyone, this is Nick with Tenacity.ai with my co-host Jason. Today we're going to continue our FinOps series and talk about how FinOps can improve your cloud cost governance in your organization. So I guess first we should probably talk a little bit about governance and where that exists inside of the organization, and is this a function that's technical? Is this a function that is at a different level in the organization, and what it might look like for you all, especially if it's new or you're just implementing it. So I guess Jason, let's start off with what is governance, or what is cloud cost governance?
Oh, well, I think there's some non-sexy definitions of it, but I think we break it down into three main points. It's about accountability, transparency, and responsibility. And in your particular question, it would be around cloud costs, right? I mean, obviously there's governance for IT, there's governance for security and whatnot, but in this particular case, accountability, transparency, and responsibility around how you're managing, controlling, optimizing, reporting cloud costs internal to the organization.
Absolutely. It deals with topics like risk and the sort of ethical decisions, especially for shareholders or stakeholders, or those in the organization maybe who are held accountable. So I think understanding how governance works inside of your organization is important. If there is not yet a cloud governance organization, if there's and you might recognize it in terms of a PMO, or you might recognize it in terms of even enterprise architecture or operational excellence or a CCOE. There's a number of places that it can exist, or it can get its start. But being able to approach that organization and really take the processes and the principles that they've developed and apply it to cloud cost management. Now, it may already exist, right? So it may already be in place, and you're just looking at, well, how do I get the maximum benefit from it? It may not exist at all, and you're starting it in order to drive accountability, to drive responsibility inside of the organization. So we're going to try and cover off what those benefits are, how you can improve, whether the organization exists or whether you're still trying to build or mature it. So I guess, Jason, let's start with I think probably the first one, which is accountability. How is it that FinOps can help improve accountability in regards to cloud cost management? Or I'm sorry, cloud cost governance.
Which one? Let's see here. I mean, I think in general, FinOps is designed to help companies be more accountable around or not companies, but the people inside the organization who are utilizing, paying for, deploying. It's about making sure that there are certain processes that need to be followed, and FinOps helps us define those processes that need to be followed to make sure that we're always allocating out our environment. We always know why we're spending what we're spending. We know why we're using what we're using. We can tie it to revenue. And so, it helps by defining those things, giving users, the people who affect this, the information that they need to be able to make smarter decisions on a day-to-day basis. And the outcome is that they're more accountable towards the bill. But, why don't you add to it?
Well, and I would say just, very directly, the very first thing you do in FinOps is allocation. And that drives accountability. Immediately taking
just knowing
a cost center and assigning those costs to a line of business, to a revenue source, or to another cost center within the organization, it immediately starts driving accountability. Even if it's just on paper, the switch flips a bit, and you are now able to actually talk to someone about those costs because they're taken out of the bill as kind of this amorphous big, blob of spending, and they're now assigned out. And so I know that's like a really simple concept, but it's sometimes it's one of the hardest things inside of organizations to take costs and actually assign them to the business and where the business is spending money. And so, I've been through this in probably every organization I've ever been in, that there has always been costs that are just part of a cost center that aren't being allocated out to the organization using them. And then when you allocate out to them, they go, wait a minute, I don't even need that. So, there's, and that's a simple example, but that is accountability right there, is when you actually start allocating those costs out and force them to make decisions about it. So very first thing that happens.
Well, I agree with you. And I think, it's like, I think people fail, sometimes we forget this, that if you just arm humans with decisions or with data on how their decisions affect things like cost, which a lot of people inside organizations don't know, like when an engineer goes and deploys something, they either are going to go maybe to the management console and go deploy it, or they're just going to deploy it with code. There's nothing that tells you how much this thing is going to be when you deploy it. They have no idea unless they go to a different page and look it up and see the hourly rate or this or that, and then, or they don't know how long it's going to run. It's like, it's really difficult to get the information when you're doing these deployments. So just arming people with the data that shows them how these decisions are affecting spend and utilization, it just drives accountability in turn. It's like one of the byproducts. It's like people will be more personally accountable to these things if they know how. Everybody knows, if I go spin up a server that costs $2,000 a month, personally, I'm going to think in my head, holy crap, that's like as much as, rent or, like a house payment or like 4 cars or whatever that you're going to equate that to in your mind. And you're just going to be more accountable to those things. And there are exceptions to that. But I think a byproduct of doing this is accountability. And we beat the crap out of that one.
I agree. So let's talk about transparency then. So I think this is a little bit bigger topic than, transparency is a cornerstone of good governance, being able to communicate across the organization. When there's a lack of transparency, it sends up red flags. I mean, that's really important to understand if you're trying to implement governance inside of your organization. The immediate impact of having transparency is it starts to build trust right away. So how does FinOps, how do the principles of FinOps, or how does the framework itself help with the transparency piece or the transparency principle of governance?
It's the foundation. First thing you do is make sure you have access to all of the data around spend and utilization, and that it's allocated out to, or at least, it's allocated out to where you have every cost allocated. You might have a big bucket of costs that are allocated to nothing yet, but at least they're out there and they're in a bucket. So the first thing is getting transparency into the utilization and costs. This is like the foundational step. And it's what FinOps drives you to do first and foremost. It drives all of the other functionality. You can't optimize your environment unless you know why you have the stuff, because, I could have... you could have double the amount of resources deployed than you actually need. And what's the point? What's the point of buying reserved instances on them if you don't need them in the first place? And so I think it's foundational, and it forces companies to make sure that that you agree upon the data set that you're looking at, how you're looking at it, and how you're going to allocate it out to the business, so that internal stakeholders to the cloud cost governance program are informed and understand everything, and you're all speaking the same language.
I think it's also, it's data-driven decision making, right? Now, you can be transparent about the sorts of decisions that are being made, whether it's to increase spending because it aligns to maybe some new revenue acquired, or whether it's to decrease spending because you're finding abandoned resources that aren't being utilized, or whether it's, the sorts of discount programs you can drive inside of the cloud because you understand the consistency or persistence of use, and can go make decisions around adjusting rates. Those are all components of transparency in governance, where you can show the sorts of options out to the organization that they can take, and that when decisions are made, let's just take an example that I think most of us have experienced. When decisions are made in one area of the business that has an outsized impact on costs, but maybe doesn't have an upside potential, being transparent then with that data and being able to have that discussion, whether it's with the person who's accountable, the owner, or whether it's with, internally, what you're going to do to help manage what the new risk that they've created, I think is important. That's that transparency piece. And it also brings us to the third piece of this puzzle, which is responsibility. That's a big component of governance, is really being responsible for spending. In this case of cloud cost governance, is making sure that you're taking that responsibility from really kind of a top-down approach. And I say top-down, we can misinterpret that. What this means is, instead of thinking about it like an org chart, thinking about it as you have now a group that agrees on how you're going to govern, and can then help organizations, the rest of your organization, in being responsible, in making critical decisions. So, how does this play out? How does FinOps improve responsibility from a governance perspective?
Well, I think one of the key points is that everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing, right? I mean, all of the stakeholders in cloud cost management, right, which span multiple teams and departments. This isn't just, it's typically multiple departments and teams: procurement, finance, engineering, cloud operations, whatever you want to call it. Those teams know what their roles are. Everybody's speaking the same language. That's a point that I think is really key for responsibility. What about you?
I think that if as cloud spending is trending up in an organization, which it generally does, unless there's some initiative to not do that. And so as organizations adopt cloud, as they migrate, as they transform, as they go cloud native, and they continue to build in the cloud, a lot of the same procurement restraint is no longer on those purchases. And that sort of variable spending, consumption-based model can fall into a category of irresponsibility, just to use the term because we're talking about responsibility. And when you're implementing your cloud governance practices, or your governance practices in general, you're wanting to centralize responsibility over, say, budget, right? So that you're managing risks, so you're managing, the costs themselves. And so I think this one, just FinOps, implementing FinOps in general, actually applies the principle of responsibility immediately. Two is that it makes it more than the effort of the person who's accountable or the organization who's accountable. So let's say you have a line of business, and they're they have there's COGS, they understand their unit economics, you've done all that work, and then they make an investment. Maybe it's to expand the revenue line or whatever, and so their COGS may go out of whack, or maybe more so the case, the unit economics might go out of whack for a while. And having an organization that's centrally responsible that can look at that and say, well, is this a responsible use? Is this what we should be doing? Is this the investment we should make? To be able to work with that organization, that product organization potentially, I think is really important. That's an important part of governance, because if everybody did that, your cloud costs can go way out of control and nobody knows why. Whereas it may be that it's just a potential investment. Like, we're going to leverage the power of cloud and all the capability that we have. Maybe we're going to use a technology that wouldn't otherwise be available to us to help upsell and increase our margin, blah, 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 blah. But it takes an initial investment. Being able to have, FinOps in there to create this sort of transparency, data-driven decision-making, real-time feedback, understanding unit economics really does bring responsibility to the spending inside of your organization. I probably overkilled that explanation, but that's where I think responsibility.
No, I don't think it is. It is rather complex, because I think if you think about it, most companies aren't. Once they realize they have a cloud spend problem, there is so much money that's been wasted over the course of a period of time. I mean, it's not. If you realize you have this problem, you've wasted a significant amount of money already. I mean, even if you look at some larger companies that maybe don't have a huge presence in the cloud, maybe $50,000 a month, $10,000 of that, it could be waste, but it's 50,000. It's like a rounding error or something, but there's real money that's being wasted month over month because people just don't know inside the organization how and in some cases you have a few people that hold themselves personally accountable or personally responsible themselves, right, to go understand how their decisions make, but that's not really common. And so I think it's a hard thing to explain, because a lot of people don't think they have the problem, and they don't understand the power of being able to do some of the things that you just mentioned. Actually, being able to look at, as an example, let's say our revenues are going down for companies across the country right now, across the world, right? Revenue is I guess profits are at an all-time high, but revenue is going down for a lot of companies, right? If my costs that are tied to, in the cloud, tied to my production or revenue generating product are going up, but my revenue is going down, that's a problem. And if I don't know what portion of my environment is directly related to how I generate revenue, how would I ever know that? Never. So I think it's really, it's a hard it's hard to grasp the benefits, but once you do, you'll be in a much better world.
I agree. I think that's a place to wrap it. So, Jason, I think that was the parting thought. So I think it's, so for our listeners, head out to Reddit/r/cloud cost optimization. You can drop questions there. We're hanging out in that arena. We'll answer them on the show. Absolutely. Or get a discussion going on the subreddit. You can also hit us up at tenacity.ai, download the cloud cost optimization handbook. We're getting a lot of those downloads now. Love your feedback on it. We're always updating it, so expect that you'll see tweaks to that coming as we receive more and more feedback from our listeners. Other than that, head out to tenacity.ai if you want a demo of the Tenacity platform. Happy to hop on a quick show and get you set up and show you where there's potentially areas for improvement inside of your AWS or Azure environment. Thanks everyone for listening.